In the heart of the desert, along the life-giving Nile River, one of the greatest civilizations in history was born. For over 3,000 years, ancient Egypt built pyramids, ruled powerful empires, and left mysteries that still fascinate the world. This is the complete history of ancient Egypt, from the first pharaohs to the fall of Cleopatra VII. Long before great empires, monumental cities, or powerful kings existed, there was only a river flowing through an endless desert. That river was the Nile, and it would become the lifeline of one of the most extraordinary civilizations in human history, ancient Egypt. The land surrounding the Nile was harsh and unforgiving. Vast deserts stretched in every direction, making large-scale settlement almost impossible. But the Nile created a narrow corridor of life. Every year, the river flooded its banks, spreading rich, dark soil across the valley. This natural cycle transformed the land into one of the most fertile agricultural regions of the ancient world. Around 6000 BC, early human communities began settling along the Nile. These people were among the first farmers of the region. They cultivated crops such as wheat and barley, and domesticated animals like goats and cattle. Over time, they learned to observe and predict the Nile's flooding cycle. This knowledge allowed them to develop basic irrigation systems, helping them control water and expand their agricultural production. As food became more reliable, populations began to grow. Small villages slowly developed along the riverbanks. These communities started to trade with one another, exchange goods, and share knowledge. Social structures began to form, with leaders emerging to organize labor, manage resources, and protect the settlements. These early developments laid the foundation for something much larger. Over centuries, these scattered communities would gradually unite, forming the earliest political structures that would eventually give rise to one of the most powerful civilizations the world had ever seen: ancient Egypt. As centuries passed, the small farming villages along the Nile began to grow into larger and more organized communities. Agriculture became increasingly efficient, and the surplus of food allowed populations to expand. With more people living along the riverbanks, new forms of leadership and social organization began to appear. Local chiefs and rulers started to control specific regions, managing irrigation systems, organizing labor, and protecting their communities from rival groups. Gradually, these settlements developed into two distinct regions. In the northern part of the Nile, near the Mediterranean Sea, a region known as Lower Egypt emerged. This area was characterized by wide marshlands and multiple branches of the Nile forming the Nile Delta. In contrast, the southern region along the narrow Nile Valley became known as Upper Egypt. Despite the confusing names, Upper Egypt was actually located further south because the Nile flows from south to north. For centuries, these two regions developed their own cultures, traditions, and symbols of power. Lower Egypt adopted the red crown as a symbol of its rulers, while Upper Egypt used the white crown. Both regions had their own gods, political centers, and ruling elites. Competition and conflict between these two lands became increasingly common as leaders sought to control the fertile lands along the Nile. Around 3100 BC, a powerful ruler from Upper Egypt, traditionally known as King Narmer, succeeded in conquering Lower Egypt. This event marked one of the most important moments in ancient history, the political unification of Egypt. With the union of the two lands, the foundations of the first Egyptian dynasty were established, beginning a civilization that would endure for thousands of years. After the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt around 3100 BC, the foundations of one of the world's first great civilizations were firmly established. The ruler who unified the land, often identified as King Narmer, became the first pharaoh of a long line of kings who would rule Egypt for thousands of years. The title pharaoh represented far more than a political leader. In Egyptian belief, the pharaoh was considered a divine figure, chosen by the gods to maintain order and harmony in the world. This concept was deeply connected to the Egyptian idea of Ma'at, a principle representing balance, truth, and cosmic order. The pharaoh's duty was to protect Ma'at and prevent chaos from taking over the land. Because of this belief, the ruler held absolute authority over the kingdom, controlling the army, religion, agriculture, and the distribution of resources. During the early dynastic period, the first major cities began to develop. One of the most important was Memphis, which became the political capital of Egypt. Located near the boundary between Upper and Lower Egypt, Memphis served as a strategic center for administration, trade, and governance. At the same time, Egyptian society became more structured. A complex hierarchy formed beneath the pharaoh. High officials, priests, scribes, soldiers, craftsmen, and farmers all played specific roles in maintaining the stability of the kingdom. Scribes were particularly important, as they were responsible for writing and record-keeping using hieroglyphics, one of the earliest writing systems in history. These developments marked the beginning of a highly organized and centralized civilization, setting the stage for the rise of monumental architecture and the powerful Old Kingdom that would soon follow. Around 2686 BC, Egypt entered a period known as the Old Kingdom, often called the Age of the Pyramids. During this time, the power of the pharaoh reached new heights, and the Egyptian state became highly organized and stable. Strong central leadership allowed massive building projects and the expansion of royal authority across the entire Nile Valley. One of the most important rulers of this period was Pharaoh Djoser. Under his reign, a brilliant architect named Imhotep designed one of the first great stone monuments in history, the Step Pyramid of Saqqara. Unlike earlier tombs made of mud brick, this pyramid was constructed entirely of stone and represented a major technological and architectural breakthrough. The success of Djoser's pyramid inspired later pharaohs to build even larger and more ambitious monuments. Over the following centuries, Egypt would construct the most famous pyramids ever built. The greatest examples appeared during the 4th dynasty, particularly under Pharaoh Khufu. Khufu ordered the construction of the Great Pyramid of Giza, a massive structure that remained the tallest man-made building in the world for thousands of years. These pyramids were not simply displays of power, they were monumental tombs designed to ensure the pharaoh's journey into the afterlife. Egyptians believed that life continued after death, and the body of the pharaoh had to be preserved through mummification so that the soul could live eternally. The construction of these enormous monuments required thousands of skilled workers, engineers, and laborers. Their efforts demonstrated the extraordinary organization, resources, and unity of the Egyptian state during the height of the Old Kingdom. By around 2200 BC, the strength and stability of the Old Kingdom began to weaken. For centuries, the pharaohs had ruled with near absolute authority, but over time, the power of local governors, known as nomarchs, began to grow. These regional leaders controlled important agricultural lands and resources, and many of them started acting more independently from the central government. At the same time, Egypt faced a series of environmental and economic challenges. Historical evidence suggests that the Nile experienced several years of weak flooding. Since Egyptian agriculture depended entirely on the annual flood to fertilize the land, poor floods meant reduced harvests, food shortages, and growing instability across the kingdom. As central authority weakened, the state could no longer effectively control its territories. Rival leaders competed for power, and Egypt gradually fragmented into smaller regional states. This period of political division and disorder became known as the First Intermediate Period. Although later Egyptian records often describe this era as a time of chaos and collapse, it was also a period of regional cultural development. Local rulers sponsored new forms of art, literature, and architecture. However, without a strong central ruler, Egypt remained politically divided. Eventually, a powerful leader from the southern city of Thebes rose to prominence. This ruler, Mentuhotep II, began a campaign to reunify the country. After years of conflict, he successfully defeated rival kingdoms and restored political unity to Egypt around 2055 BC. His victory marked the beginning of a new era known as the Middle Kingdom, a time when Egypt would once again experience stability, cultural growth, and expanding influence across the ancient world. Around 2055 BC, Egypt entered a new era known as the Middle Kingdom. After years of political division during the First Intermediate Period, the reunification led by Mentuhotep II restored stability and strong central leadership to the country. Thebes became one of the most important political and religious centers of Egypt, and the pharaoh once again held authority over the entire Nile Valley. The rulers of the Middle Kingdom focused heavily on rebuilding the strength of the state. They improved irrigation systems, expanded agricultural lands, and reorganized the government to better manage resources and labor. This period also saw the strengthening of Egypt's borders, as pharaohs built forts and military outposts to protect the kingdom from external threats. Trade and exploration became increasingly important during this time. Egyptian expeditions traveled south into Nubia, a region rich in gold, ivory, and other valuable resources. Control over Nubia allowed Egypt to gain wealth and expand its influence beyond its traditional borders. At the same time, trade routes connected Egypt to the Near East, bringing new goods, materials, and cultural influences into the kingdom. The Middle Kingdom was also a golden age of literature and culture. Egyptian scribes produced some of the most famous literary works of ancient history, including wisdom texts, stories, and religious writings. Art and architecture also flourished, though the monuments of this period were generally smaller and more refined than the massive pyramids of the Old Kingdom. Despite this prosperity, new challenges would soon emerge. Foreign groups from Western Asia would eventually enter the Nile Delta, bringing Egypt into a new and dramatic period of transformation. Around 1700 BC, the stability of the Middle Kingdom began to collapse. Once again, central authority weakened, and Egypt entered another period of political fragmentation, known as the Second Intermediate Period. During this time, a foreign group known as the Hyksos gradually gained control of the northern regions of Egypt, particularly the Nile Delta. The Hyksos were originally migrants from Western Asia who had settled in the region over time. Eventually, they established their own rule in Lower Egypt and created a capital city called Avaris. Unlike previous invaders, the Hyksos did not completely destroy Egyptian culture. Instead, they adopted many Egyptian customs, titles, and administrative systems while ruling over the land. However, they also introduced new military technologies that would change warfare in Egypt forever. Among the most important were horse-drawn chariots, composite bows, and improved bronze weapons. These innovations gave the Hyksos a significant advantage over traditional Egyptian armies. While the Hyksos controlled the north, native Egyptian rulers continued to govern the south from the city of Thebes. Over time, tensions grew between the Egyptian kings of Thebes and the Hyksos rulers of the Delta. The southern rulers refused to accept foreign domination and began preparing for war. Eventually, a Theban ruler named Ahmose I launched a series of military campaigns against the Hyksos. After years of conflict, he successfully expelled them from Egypt around 1550 BC. This victory not only restored Egyptian independence, but also marked the beginning of a powerful new era known as the New Kingdom. Around 1550 BC, Egypt entered one of the most powerful and influential periods of its history, the New Kingdom. After expelling the Hyksos, the Egyptian rulers realized the importance of maintaining a strong and modern military. The technologies introduced by the Hyksos, such as chariots and advanced weapons, were quickly adopted and improved by the Egyptians. With these new tools, Egypt transformed from a relatively defensive kingdom into a powerful imperial state. The pharaohs of the New Kingdom began expanding Egypt's borders far beyond the Nile Valley. Armies marched north into the Levant and south into Nubia, securing trade routes and valuable resources. These military campaigns brought enormous wealth into Egypt, including gold, precious stones, exotic animals, and tribute from conquered territories. One of the most famous rulers of this era was Hatshepsut, one of the few female pharaohs in Egyptian history. Instead of focusing on military conquest, she emphasized trade, architecture, and economic development. Her reign was marked by prosperity and ambitious building projects, including her magnificent temple at Deir el-Bahri. Later pharaohs, such as Thutmose III, expanded Egypt's empire even further. Often called the Napoleon of Egypt, Thutmose III led numerous successful military campaigns that established Egypt as the dominant power in the Near East. The New Kingdom became a time of extraordinary wealth, monumental construction, and international influence. Temples grew larger, cities expanded, and Egypt stood at the height of its political and cultural power. Yet even this golden age would eventually face internal struggles and dramatic change.
During the later period of the New Kingdom, Egypt experienced both remarkable achievements and growing internal tensions. One of the most unusual and controversial rulers of this era was Pharaoh Akhenaten, who came to power around 1353 BC. Akhenaten introduced a dramatic religious transformation that challenged centuries of Egyptian tradition. For thousands of years, Egyptians had worshipped many gods, with powerful priesthoods controlling temples across the country. However, Akhenaten attempted to replace this traditional system with the worship of a single deity, known as Aten, represented by the sun disk. This radical shift is often described as one of the earliest attempts at monotheism in history. To support his new religious vision, Akhenaten built an entirely new capital city called Akhetaten, known today as Amarna. He moved the royal court there and reduced the influence of the powerful priests of Amun, who had previously dominated Egyptian religion. While some supported these changes, many Egyptians resisted abandoning their ancient beliefs. After Akhenaten's death, the traditional religious system was quickly restored. His successor, the young pharaoh Tutankhamun, reversed the reforms and re-established the worship of the old gods. Temples were reopened, and the capital eventually returned to its previous centers. Although the political system remained intact, the later years of the New Kingdom were marked by increasing pressure from external enemies and internal instability. Powerful rival empires, economic challenges, and growing corruption within the administration gradually weakened Egypt's once dominant position in the ancient world. By the end of the New Kingdom, around 1070 BC, the power of the Egyptian empire had begun to decline significantly. The enormous wealth and influence that once flowed into Egypt from conquered territories began to disappear as the empire lost control over distant lands. Internal corruption, economic difficulties, and political struggles weakened the authority of the pharaoh. During this period, Egypt once again fragmented into competing centers of power. Local rulers and powerful priests gained influence, particularly the priests of Amun in the city of Thebes. Without strong centralized leadership, the kingdom became vulnerable to foreign powers that were rising across the Mediterranean and the Near East. Over the next several centuries, Egypt was conquered and ruled by a series of foreign empires. The Assyrians invaded the region in the 7th century BC, followed by the Persians, who incorporated Egypt into their vast empire. Although some Egyptian dynasties briefly regained independence, the country never fully returned to the strength it had during its earlier golden ages. One of the most famous final chapters of ancient Egyptian history came with the rise of Cleopatra VII, the last ruler of the Ptolemaic dynasty. After her defeat alongside Mark Antony against the forces of Octavian in 30 BC, Egypt officially became a province of the Roman Empire. With this event, more than 3,000 years of pharaonic civilization came to an end. Yet the legacy of ancient Egypt, its pyramids, temples, writing, and culture, continues to fascinate and inspire the world to this day.